Hello there! Céad míle fáilte, 100,000 welcomes to another story from the rambling seanchai. Well, as you can see this time we're trying something a bit different here. I'm in my family home. I've got a lovely crackling fire here beside me. The wind's howling down the chimney and a wee bit of rain pattering away on the window outside. It's perfect conditions to tell a story. And for the story today, we're going to be travelling off to the wild western coast of Ireland, way off to Connemara in County Galway, to learn about the magical secret of the gleaming green marble that lies buried underneath the ground there. So, strap yourselves in, lads, for we've got quite a journey ahead of us today. This magnificent spread of boggy islands, jagged peaks and jutting peninsulas is surely one of the best views in all Ireland. It's known as An Bóthar na Spéir, the Sky Road, way up on the wild western coast of Connemara in County Galway, right in the heart of the largest remaining Gaeltacht in Ireland. Wisps of turf smoke and whispers of quailga and changashan tumble alongside one another through that crisp and clear Connemara air. The old ways are alive and well in this ancient place, thriving everlasting in the mesmerizing landscape that changes so drastically all around this relatively small region. Clustered archipelagos of small islands huddle around the shore, watching the sea tear deep, savage gashes into the coast, forming great bays that reach right into the heart of Connemara. And then, looming far above the many lochs and bogs, are the great peaks of nabeannabeola, the 12bens. These stony mountains dominate the skyline of Connemara and can be seen from all around like great warriors mustered together to stop the relentless onslaught of the sea. Each of these mountains holds its own stories and treasures, but all share a common secret, one that makes Connemara truly special. For underneath the barren peaks, buried deep within the dark earth and sparkling quartzite, is a hidden treasure that is famous throughout the whole island of Ireland. A gleaming green wonder from a bygone age, the Connemaramarble. This magic, verdant rock has no equal anywhere else on Ireland, nor anywhere else in the world for that matter. It is truly unique to this area. The quarrying of Connemaramarble is also one of the oldest industries in the whole of Ireland, going back thousands of years to the time of Stone Age man. It is still quarried today in places like Moycullen, where local craftsmen fashion it into beautiful beads, pendants, and of course, the iconic Claddagh ring of County Galway. The marble is one of the most recognisable symbols of Irish identity and is known as the national gemstone of Ireland. Some say the marble was formed over 600 million years ago when muddy limestone was superheated by ancient fire that now lies dormant deep below our feet. Well, so say the scientists anyway, but well, that is impressive and all that, sure. It's not really much of a story, is it? But there are also others who tell of a different tale, for if you look beyond the confines of scientific fact, you can find another possible origin for this otherworldly rock. Turning instead to the ancient mythology, which just like the marble itself dates back to time immemorial. And it's this story that I'll tell today. A tale of kings and warriors, of fairies and foreigners, and of treachery and betrayal. A tale of how the Connemaramarble came to be, and of a huge period of upheaval that would change Ireland forever. Connemara is part of County Galway, called Galibh in Irish, which means stony river. This is likely named for the river Corrib that flows out of the great loch of the same name and into Galway Bay. Galway itself is part of Connacht, the smallest of the 4 proud provinces and the one that was once ruled over by Queen Maith. She, the formidable woman who brought Ulster to its knees in Anton Quilne, and who wrought the end of Cuchulainn, Ulster's greatest hero. Queen Maeve had 3 sons, Mo Rua, Ciar and Conmac, and when the mighty queen died they all took their share of her land. Conmac went to the area on the coast and spread as far east as Loch Corrib and Loch Mask. Conmac's people were called na Connemara, the Conmacna of the sea, which in turn led to the anglicised name of their home, thereafter known as Connemara. But far before the time of Conmac, Queen Maeve or any of their people, 2 other great factions ruled over Ireland. One was the tuathadedanann, a beautiful race of gods and fairy folk whose magical powers were like those never seen on Ireland before or since. The other was the firbolg, the men of bags who had fled to Ireland after escaping slavery in ancient Greece. They were a mostly peaceful people who tended to and respected the land and thus were able to draw from it wonderful natural treasures that filled their bellies for many's a long year. But the tuathadedanann were not like any other folk in this world. They were the people of the goddess Danu, and she had bestowed upon them spectacular gifts that brought both riches and ruin wherever they went. And when the tuathadedanann arrived in Ireland, they fought the firbolg at the first battle of Maith, one of the most terrible conflicts in Ireland's long history. There, the tuathadedanann decimated the firbolg with their mystic powers, and they would have massacred them all had it not been for the goddess Brigid, who arranged for the firbolg to be allowed to settle down in Connacht. I've told this epic of a story before in my video about the goddess Brigid, so be sure to have a wee nosy at that one if you want to know a bit more. But despite their bloody beginning, the firbolg and the tuathadedanann mostly got on fairly well for a good long while. Firbolg took mainly to farming, and as the custodians of Connacht, they made that land into a thriving utopia, all the while living alongside nature and never taking more than what they needed. Both their people and the landscape around them flourished, all part of one great cycle of life that worked in perfect tandem with one another. And this was the way it was when the firbolg were led by rinabeola, a man whose name roughly translates simply as the king of the firbolg. Although ironically, he himself was not the firbolg at all. He was one of the tuathadedanann and had settled in Connemara long ago and was fiercely protective of his land. He was a great big man, more of a giant really, just like the firbolg people that he ruled over. You could tell by those huge, hardened, rough-skinned fists and that leathery, weather-beaten old face that he was a man of the soil who had worked the land for more years than he could count. His giant black beard and his long curly hair were speckled with wisps of grey and white, and under those great shaggy eyebrows rested a pair of cool blue eyes. And under his watchful eye, the proud province of Connacht reached a period of prosperity never before seen. He ruled from benban, one of the peaks in nabeannabeola, the mountains of the firbolg. Translated from Irish, benban means the white peak, due to its supernatural ability to conjure up a great mist that would smother the mountain when any intruder approached. And this was because rinabeola had a great treasure stashed away there with him on benban, one that he intended to protect more than anything in this world. This was, of course, his most cherished herd of cattle. Well, okay, so that might not seem too impressive nowadays, but here, ask any of the Irish kings of old and they'd tell you just how important cows were back in them days, mainly because they were the main currency in Ireland for thousands of years. And if you had a really good one then, geez, you'd be definitely doing alright for yourself. And rinabeola's cattle were not just good, they were said to be the very best in all of Connacht. He had hand-selected them from all the farthest reaches of the province and had spent a good portion of his life nurturing and guarding them. They'd become incredibly strong due to having to climb up and down the mountain pastures all day, and this was because of a bit of fairy magic that rinabeola had done up for himself. He had enchanted the grass on each of the 12bens, imbuing each blade with otherworldly powers that would make anything that ate it supremely strong. So I suppose it's no wonder really why rinabeola loved his cattle so, and why he was so fixated on keeping them safe and sound. But of course, the story wouldn't be one worth telling if everything was just smooth sailing forever for rinabeola and his cattle. But as it turns out, a huge threat to his livelihood was mustering in the near future, like the first cold, sharp squalls blowing ahead of an enormous storm. But this harbinger came in a pretty unlikely form. For one day, a small little sailing boat moored on Ireland's western shore, and from it jumped a man named Ith. Ith was skinny and lanky, just past middle age, with a dark, slightly greying mess of hair and a short, scraggly beard to him from a long time spent out at sea. But really, he was a very unremarkable man to look upon, yet his presence here would drastically change Ireland forever. He was an explorer from the Iberian Peninsula, from the land that would eventually be known as Spain. He was searching for a magical land that he had discovered in his dreams, a beautiful emerald island way out in the west. He and the small crew of his little boat had explored all over the great Atlantic Ocean, and now they had arrived on fair Erin's coast. And oh, weren't those tired lads just amazed by the wonders that they saw there. There were huge oak forests that were absolutely teeming with good deer for hunting, and rivers so chock full of fish that Ith could just stroll right over the top of them without getting a single toe wet. And then, venturing further inland, he came to a clearing where he saw 3 men engaged in a heated argument. But these were like no men Ith had ever seen before in his life, for they were huge, towering over him and his crew, even though they were sitting down, hunched over on some great big creepy stools. They were the all-powerful kings of the tuathadedanann, Macul, son of the hazel, Macecht, son of the plough, and Macgrania, the son of the sun. They were the 3 sons of King Kermit Honeymouth, who himself was son of the Dagda, one of the most powerful gods in Irish mythology. And the whole lot of them were slagging away to each other, each one fiercely claiming this particular bit of land as their own, while the others even more fiercely told them just exactly where to go. Ith was confused, no, baffled by their disagreement. He didn't really understand why these 3 great men were so bogged down by such a petty problem, when clearly there was plenty of beautiful, bountiful land around here for all of them. And so, forgetting himself for a moment, he came out from behind his hiding spot and confronted them. And he said, "Great lords, why do you quarrel so about who owns what bit of land? Your country is filled to the brim with more trees, more animals, more fresh rivers and beautiful beaches than I have ever seen. I've traveled all over the world searching for a place like this that I thought only existed in my dreams. And after everywhere I've been and everything I've seen, believe me when I say that there is no land that can hold a candle to yours that even comes close to being anywhere near as marvelous and spell-binding as this jewel of an island that you call home. Oh, you're such a lucky bunch to live here. Like there's enough food and land here to sustain millions and millions of people. Surely you must be content enough with what you already have, no?" Well, the 3 kings of the tuathadedanann were, well, quite simply stunned by what they were seeing and hearing. For here was this tiny, insignificant little man ranting and raving to them about what they should be doing with their own land. Like, how could a complete stranger like this dare to even perceive such divine beings as themselves, let alone start berating them for the way that they were governing their own kingdoms? Like the sheer, unthinkable, mind-boggling, audacious, absolute gumption of this tiny planktonic speck of a life form was nearly enough to give them all an apoplectic shock, so powerful it would send them all packing straight to the other world. But instead, they just sat there with their jaws hanging open, staring in disbelief at the little man. When they eventually snapped out of it, the 3 turned their backs on it and formed a little huddle, to figure out what they should do about this inexplicable intruder. McCool spoke first and he said, "Well lads, I don't know what you make of that, but I don't exactly fancy being scolded like a child by a man who's barely even taller than one. And a stranger to these shores at that. I mean, seriously, who does he think he is?" And then Maith chimed in and he said, "Well, I'll tell you exactly what he thinks he is. No man would speak so boldly and brashly about a country he's never been to before, lest he was talking with the tongue of a conqueror. Mark my words, lads, this fella is just scouting us out, and if we let him go, he'll send an invading army to come and take away all of our land, and then it won't matter who owns what bit of what." Magrania agreed. He said, "Yes, right you are, so we can't go letting this scheming little rat swim away back to his brethren. And after all, there's three of us, and we're the three great kings of the tuathadedanann, no less. Like, we're basically gods, so we can definitely take this fella. I mean, seriously, what's the worst that can happen? Here, tell you what, I'll go get my big club here, and then I'll get us started, so." Well, Magrania did exactly that. And with one mighty swing of his arm, he crashed his great club right down on Ith's head, smushing him so far into the ground that it left a huge crater in the earth. And then McCool leapt forwards with his bow and loosed an entire quiver of 100 arrows or more straight into the ruptured earth where Ith's broken body lay. And then, just to make sure that he was definitely dead, Maith went and found the biggest boulder that he could carry, and he threw it high into the air. It rose so high that it temporarily blotted the sun, and then landed down on top of Ith with a deafening boom. The kings of the tuathadedanann seemed fairly proud of the way they'd handled this particular diplomatic situation. But they did not notice the horrified members of Ith's crew scampering away through the trees and back to their boat on the shore. They hightailed it back to their country and told Ith's brother, míle about all that had happened on their doomed voyage. And when míle heard of what had happened to his beloved brother, a dread rage fell upon him that not a single soul nor any of the delights of his own homeland could come close to quelling. He consulted with his druids about what he should do, and when asked this, his wise old druids told him that they had gazed out across the waves, across the long leagues of sea, and that they had seen the land that Ith had found, a place of unparalleled beauty and plenty. They told Míle that there would be no country for his people until they came to that island out in the west. And they assured him that even if Míle would not get possession of it, his descendants would rule over that land for many centuries to come. And so Míle rallied a great many fighting men and women from all over Hispania, including his own 8 sons as well. He promised them that a land of everlasting paradise was there for the taking, the type that his people had longed for so long. And so they didn't take much persuading. They all packed their things and set out in a great armada across the sea to old Ireland. And when Míle and his people thought of the brutal murder of Ith, a man who was really just an unarmed, innocent traveller, it filled them with both fear and fury and made them ravenous with hunger for revenge against the tuathadedanann. They knew, though, that the task of fighting the tuathadedanann would be no easy thing, for they'd heard from the surviving members of Ith's crew that the tuathadedanann were like gods among men, towering above all with supernatural gifts of strength that defied belief. They knew that there would be a fair share of trials and tribulations before they could take Ireland, but what Míle and his men didn't account for was just how quickly these trials and tribulations would come. For before Ireland's coastline had even come into view, a terrible, unnatural sickness ravaged through Míle's armada. It was a terrible thing, causing anyone infected with it to cough up heaps of blood for hours and then dying in writhing agony. The battle cries on the afflicted ships became cries of terror before eventually there were no voices left on them to cry out at all. Those ghost ships simply drifted off in bone-chilling silence, away on some maddened course and finally wrecking on distant rocks, never to be seen again. So many of Míle's people had been decimated by this festering disease, and among the casualties lost at sea was none other than Míle himself, wiped out in one of the most foul and debilitating ways imaginable, and all without ever even laying sight on Ireland. The suddenness of how quickly this plague had descended on them was not natural at all. They knew that they'd been dealt some nightmare curse by the tuathadedanann, who had also been enshrouding Ireland in mist to keep it hidden from the invaders. But it was then that Amergin, the least favourite son of Míle, took the helm of his ship and followed the call of his uncle Ith's spirit that led him and the Milesian army towards that isle out in the west. And much like his uncle Ith, Amergin was not exactly the first image that came to mind when you thought of a conqueror. He was short and slender and not all that physically strong. Really, he was more of a bard and a druid than a fighter, more used to conjuring up lines of filiacht, of poetry, than battle plans. He had not by any means been a favourite child of his father, who saw more value in battle prowess than in Amergin's other talents. But despite his youthful appearance, there was a steely determination in his gaze, locked away deep within his sharp facial features. And so, after the death of his father, it was Amergin who steered what remained of Míle's armada straight to Ireland's shore. And they all had to admit, when Amergin was standing there at the prow of his vessel, gazing out at the great Irish cliffs coming into view with the cold sea air coursing through his long dark hair, he did have a certain air of leadership about him. Eventually, they made a landing at a place thereafter named Inverscania, named after Amergin's wife Scania, who had been among the many to succumb to that terrible disease out at sea. And just like Ith before him, Amergin was mesmerised by the enchanting beauty of Ireland's natural wonders, most of all the great oak forest that he found him and his army venturing into. He had never seen a forest so large and dense and alive. It seemed virtually unending, like an ancient being that had been here forever and surely would be here forever too. Jeez, Amergin and his lads, they were loving it, trudging through that primeval wilderness and stuffing their mouths with all manner of blackberries, apples, haws and all as they passed on by. Their destination was the hill of Uisneach in County Westmeath, the very central heart of Ireland and the seat of its high kings for millennia. But on their journey, Amergin and his people encountered a lone woman who was also gathering fruit in the forest. When they drew closer, Amergin saw that she was supernaturally beautiful. Her pale skin was absolutely immaculate in complexion and almost seemed to emanate some kind of radiant glow, as did her gleaming, ember-like curly hair that somehow seemed both wild and perfectly sculpted at the same time. Amergin was entranced by her, despite the fact that she was just one woman and he was the leader of a huge invading army. Her otherworldly presence made him feel inferior, even slightly afraid. And so he regarded her with respect and a decent amount of caution too. She revealed herself to be Eru, the wife of Macrania and a queen of the tuathadedanann. She told Amergin that she would welcome the sons of Míle to this land on the one condition that they named it after her. And well, Amergin feared for what would happen to him and his warriors if they displeased this commanding queen, and so he thought it wise to agree to her proposal. And as he did so, Eru nodded at him calmly, before suddenly transforming into a sharp-beaked grey-white crow and crashing upwards through the canopy with a loud barrage of squawks. Amergin looked behind him at his warriors, who were really trying their best to hide their fear, though pretty unsuccessfully really. But nevertheless, they ventured further into the forest, and on 2 separate occasions they met with another 2 women of similar and settling mythic appearance and aura. They told him that they were benban and fóill, also queens of the tuathadedanann and the wives of Macul and Macet respectively. They also had the same request as their sister Eru, which Amergin, feeling quite uneasy at this point, thought that he had no choice but to also accept. But it turned out that Amergin was true to his word in the end, as he would use all three names when referring to Ireland in his poetry, a tradition which would last for over 1,000 years. It seemed as though Éireadh got the last laugh though, as it is from her name that the modern Irish word for Ireland is derived, that of Éireann or Éire. And so, satisfied that he had appeased the queens of the tuathadedanann and abated their wrath, at least for a time, Amergin and his army pressed on until they reached the hill of Uisneach. There, Amergin came face to face with the three kings of the tuathadedanann, those supremely powerful men who had so ruthlessly butchered his uncle. And just like Ith before him, he found them arguing about who should get what portions of the huge kingdom left behind by their father, King Kermit Honeymouth. Amergin, too, could not really understand how such great lords as these could not be happy with the ever-plentiful paradise that they already owned. For Amergin's people had come from a land of searing temperatures and baked earth, whereas here the sun was not too strong, the air not too cold or bitter, and there was more food in the trees, on the ground, and in the rivers and the sea that he could possibly even hope to shake a stick at. Even just one portion of this magical forest that was positively hiving with life would sustain his entire people for thousands of years. And so Amergin looked around at these three kings and the circle of wise old druids that surrounded them, and the hordes of supernatural warriors that filled the great castle of Uisneach. And he thought it wise to tread carefully but firmly, and initially asked for a peaceful resolution to the delicate diplomatic dilemma. And Sir Amergin said, "Great lords, as payment for the unlawful murder of my uncle Ith, an innocent and utterly defenceless man, you and your people must forfeit a portion of your land for me and my kin to settle in." But these proud kings, they had spent every waking moment since their father's death, squabbling and scheming over every inch of land on Ireland's shore. There was no way that they were about to give it away to a foreigner. Deep down, Amergin knew that too, but he thought it was worth having a punt at it nonetheless. Of course, they instantly refused. And not only that, they laughed uproariously at Amergin and his men, which Amergin thought was a little uncalled for, really. Amergin saw that these were the type of men who would only respond to fierce, fighting words, and so this time he said, "If you do not let my people settle in this land, then you will leave your kingdom up to the chance of battle, where my people will claim the kingship from you treacherous lords in the name of my slain uncle Ith." Now, this was more the language that the tuathadedanann liked to speak. They were pretty awestruck at this little man standing up to such a powerful force as them. It was like watching a little field mouse shouting the big talk up to a great owl that was about to devour him. So these kings admired Amergin in a way, and it was Magrania that said, "Tell you what, we'll be down for making some kind of a deal with you, but only if you'll come up with a decent enough wager. Us folks around here are fond of such things, you know, but I'll warn you here and now. If we deem your bargain to be insufficient, then I'll just order me druids here to cast their enchantments and blast you away up to the high air, and trust me lads, yous don't want that." Well, Amergin's guts were sloshing around like buttermilk in a churn, but still he held his ground and said, "I will take my men back to the land we know is in Verscania, where we will board our ships and go out to the length of 9 waves from the shore. And if you and your druids can stop us from landing once more on your island, then we will sail away back to our own country and will never again return. But if we do manage to dock safely, then you three must forfeit your kingship to us, and thenceforth be held under our sway." And Magrania, well, he considered this for a moment, consulted with his brothers, and then said, "All right, sounds fair enough. Be away on to Verscania then, away on with his lads." And so that's exactly what Amergin and his men did, boarding their ships and heading out past 8 waves, and then readied themselves to pass the 9th. Amergin was a druid himself in his own land, and therefore he knew that the 9th wave was no ordinary one. It was the wave of myth that was bound by magic power. And as it crashed over them, drenching them all in those freezing Atlantic waters that shivered you right down to the bone, they looked back at Ireland and found that it was no longer there. In its place was a great swirl of dark clouds billowing right up to the highest reaches of the atmosphere, where they churned and writhed as though they were being boiled in some giant cauldron in the sky. A huge surge of wind hurled towards Amergin and his men, punching through their sails and sending many of Amergin's vessels careering manically into one another, splintering and smashing and plummeting down into the darkest depths of the ocean. Amergin looked around in terror as his men were swept away from their boats, crushed by their masts, or simply launched up into the air, vanishing into a far-off speck right before his very eyes. He knew that this was no natural storm. This was, without a shadow of a doubt, the mystic work of the druids of the tuathadedanann, and Amergin knew that it would be no easy obstacle to overcome. But he believed above all else that his cause was just, and he believed in his druidic intuition that told him that the sons of míle would be seen on that island, and that they would feast on its fish, on its fruit and its nuts, and forge a kingship of their own under its open skies. He did not hope that it would be true. He simply knew that it was. And so he called upon Éireadh and benban, fóill, those ethereal queens of the tuathadedanann, calling upon the very spirit of Ireland itself, in desperation and anguish, in dismay and fury, and the words that he spoke are now known as the oldest song ever transcribed in Ireland's long, long history, the Song of Amergin, as translated by Lady Gregory, echoing through Ireland's past, present and future. I am the wind on the sea. I am the wave of the sea. I am the bull of 7 battles. I am the eagle on the rock. I am a flash from the sun. I am the most beautiful of plants. I am a strong wild boar. I am a salmon in the water. I am a lake in the plain. I am the word of knowledge. I am the head of the spear in battle. I am the god that puts fire in the head. Who spreads the light in the gathering on the hills? Who can tell the ages of the moon? Who can tell the place where the sun rests? The final words of the Song of Amergin cleave through wind and water like the sharpest of steel swords, severing the druids' potent enchantments just as easily as though they were a frayed old bit of cord. A great sound never before heard resonated from somewhere unimaginably deep within the earth, far below the waves and the reaches of humanity. And it was Ireland's call itself that abated the tearing winds in the ravenous maelstrom, vanishing just as quickly as it had appeared. And as the sea mist cleared away, Ireland's shore once again came into view, as inviting as an open half door with a turf fire burning away in the hearth. The sun was out, the sea was as flat and clear as a huge pane of glass. Their landing couldn't have been any easier. Amergin relished the warm breeze that tickled his face as he stepped onto Ireland's soil once more. And he saw before him that a great army of the tuathadedanann had gathered up on the high cliffs and deep within the dark forests, but he could instantly tell that they had been severely weakened. For it was not just the druid's enchantment that had faltered under Amergin's song, but every single one of their magical artifacts, their spells, their powers, everything. All that had made them so strong and mighty had left them, and oh, what a sorry-looking bunch they were now. Still, though, they were a proud people who would not go down without a fight, and geez, what a brave fight it was too. It was on the plain of Talchu that the battle was fought, that plain that was named after the great firbolg goddess of the same name, who had given her life clearing away a vast forest to bring the gift of farming to her people. and that plain was rejuvenated anew by the blood of 1,000 of the tuathadedanann who had previously ruled unopposed in Ireland for longer than history can say. But they would reign for no longer, as despite the huge losses on their side, the remaining Milesians lost no more than 300 warriors. For they had revenge in their hearts, and they carried the spirit of Ith with them as they slaughtered the broken forces of the tuathadedanann. They fought with zeal and fury, and new weapons that the tuathadedanann had never seen before. They fought with the spirit of Ireland itself on their side, and the shift in the tide was felt all across every province in the land, including in the kingdom of Rinabeola, way up in the rugged mountains of Connemara, who we will return to now. For during all this time, Rinabeola had been tending to his cattle, and although he'd been feeling a bit unwell recently, under his leadership the people of Connemara had enjoyed a bountiful harvest this year. Their food stores were full and ready for the dark half of the year, and from every peak of those 12bens could be heard music ringing out into the pleasant early Samhain air. It was in the middle of one of those great feasts that Rinabeola got a visit from a party of foreigners. This was strange because, as I said before, the whole entire reason that Rinabeola had set up shop on benban was because of that mountain's mythical ability to enshroud itself in mist when any intruders were approaching. But this time it did nothing of the sort, almost as though the mountain was welcoming these newcomers to its highest peak. Well, Rinabeola was outraged that these uninvited guests were able to just waltz straight into his feast without his saying so. And then, a small man at the front of their party, who introduced himself as Amergin, said that he was on strict orders from the 2 High Kings of Ireland. 2? Rinabeola was confused. The last he'd heard there were 3 High Kings. What had happened to the 3rd? And then, to his shock and horror, he learned from these newcomers that all 3 kings of the tuathadedanann had been slain in a great battle. Amergin said that his brothers Eber and Eramon were the new kings, with Eber ruling the south and Eramon ruling the north. These 2 kings had struck a deal with the remaining lords of the tuathadedanann, one that divided Ireland in 2, so that both sides were still able to live there. This deal was of Amergin's work, an effort at a lasting peace which his 2 warmongering brothers initially strongly opposed. But they quickly came around to it when they learned that the cunning Amergin had swindled it so that every single part of Ireland that was above ground went to the Milesians, whereas the tuathadedanann had to be happy enough with the mythic lands of the other world, below the soil, and way out in the many-coloured islands of Maith. Tuathadedanann had no choice. Their powers had been lost, their enchantments shattered, and their people broken. The magic of the other world would rejuvenate their powers and let them live forever, but they would have to forever turn their back on the Ireland that they knew and loved. And so, despite playing no part in the war and peacefully tending the land for his people for many's a long year, Rinabeola too was forced to retreat into a she-mound of his own. He had no choice. He had been weakened by the song of Amergin and was powerless to resist the new Milesian kings. So off he went to the weird and wonderful other world of Tír na nÓg, the land of eternal youth. And there are some that say that Rinabeola still dwells there to this day. But he was so outraged by this injustice of losing his land and his people when he himself was just as innocent a bystander as Ith was in the first place. He wasn't about to let some invaders prosper off the land that he had so painstakingly cultivated after so many years. And so he went and he picked every single magical blade of grass from the peaks of the 12bens. And the only one that he spared was benban itself, the place where he had once had his great castle. Every peak was thereafter left barren and bare, leaving no hope for his successors to prosper from the land in such a way that he had. And he took every one of those blades of grass and all of his bountiful cattle underground with him, where he planted them in pastures deep within the earth. There his cattle would continue to graze upon these fertile grounds for many thousands of years, feeding and sustaining rinabeola and his kin in the tuathadedanann. And over the years, the new Milesian settlers would begin farming the land above rinabeola, becoming what was known as the old Celtic or Gaelic stock of Ireland. Every now and again, one of the lucky ones would chance upon a magic rock, one that was not seen anywhere else in the world. It gleamed like an emerald in the vast tons of quartzite that made up Connemara. All the different shades of green that could be found in Ireland danced within its crystalline shell. And there were some who dismissed it simply as a scientific process. An attractive rock, yes, but just a rock, all the same, really. But there were others who still remember the old stories and know of the mythic races that once walked this land, who know of the magic green grass of rinabeola, locked deep within the rocks of Connemara, and who feel enlivened to now behold a piece of it, one that has been crushed and solidified into a hard rock after many years spent underground. And when they held this marble, they could feel that mythic power of an ancient age, like a reverberating whisper of a forgotten